Spain is in Europe. I'm sure you guys probably know that, but it's beneath France, so it's in like the southwest part of Europe. But Barcelona, specifically where I lived, is in the northeast of Spain, on the coast, so it's right on the beaches there in the Mediterranean. Just to give you guys some context about where in the world we are talking about. So we're going to first talk about how people get to school and like what school transportation looks like. So the first major thing with school transportation in Spain is the amount of public transportation they offer in general throughout the country, but especially in bigger cities like Madrid and Barcelona and Sevilla. In the bottom left is a picture of just like a typical metro, and then the top right is a picture of a public bus. People can buy passes that are relatively cheap to be able to ride on these. They'll use them for months at a time. So like when I lived in Barcelona and I was traveling to my internship every day, I would take the metro, and I had a pass that lasted me for 4 months, which was the amount of time I was there. And it's kind of interesting because you see kids in backpacks going to school surrounded by people like adults who are going to work in the same spaces. So there's really no school buses that are specific to taking kids to school. It's more just general public transportation, which is really highly valued in European countries in general. And so then they also, some people drive. There's a picture of a car in the bottom right. But more than anything, people are walking and biking everywhere in general, but also to school. Barcelona in particular is a really pedestrian-friendly country, and they have very large sidewalk spaces. They have like pedestrian designated areas and squares, and they really value being outside and being around people. So school buses definitely aren't a thing, but cars really aren't as much of a thing either. It's more public transportation, which definitely reduces their environmental impact too as a country, which is pretty cool to think about, just the different ways that people get to school and how that differs so greatly from how we get to school. I mean, maybe some of you walk to get to school, but generally people are taking buses or cars, which is pretty different. Okay, so just like a general day at school is what we're going to talk about, and I'm focusing on primary school because that's where I worked, but it pretty much all of the rules apply for school years beyond age 12. So in the top left corner, like right under daily life in school, that's actually a picture of me with some of my students who were 4. And school for them is really based on small groups and collaboration, and interacting. Like lectures aren't as much of a thing, and it's more small group based work, and asking kids to do like a lot of partner working, which is just different, I think, slightly from the United States, but I enjoyed that aspect of the way that they worked. And the top right is, all of these pictures are from my school, by the way. They're pictures that I took of the students while I was there, but the top right picture is some 5th grade students, and they're eating lunch outside, and they've packed all of their lunches. And I think something that is big is like they really focus on like movement-based activities and being outside and doing recess and doing dancing and different things like that. They always have like different activities planned throughout the day, the teachers do, for students, so that they're up and moving their bodies constantly and like not sitting at a desk all day. And so when they are eating outside, you can pack your lunch, but they also provide pretty healthy lunches in the cafeteria at the school. And something that's pretty different also from the United States is that they are free. So students have the option to pack their lunch, but if they're not, then they also have plenty of options at school to eat as well. It's just kind of more preference of what they want to eat. And then the bottom middle picture is just a picture of like what a typical classroom kind of looks like. For the younger students, they try honestly not to let them sit in desks, and they do more like sitting in circles or sitting in beanbags, sitting on rugs, and they have like more open spaces in the classroom. Something that's also really interesting, so Barcelona is in a region of Spain called Catalonia, And in that region, they also speak a language additional to Spanish, which is Catalan, and pretty much everyone knows both. And so students come to school at about age 3, and they know they're already bilingual, which is insane, I think. I mean, they know Spanish and Catalan, but something that's really interesting is that every single school is a dual language school. So they're teaching in Spanish and they're teaching in English. And so that was my role when I was at the school, was to help develop English language skills for the students, reading, writing, lots of different stuff. But by the time they are 12 years old and they're moving on to above primary school, they are pretty much trilingual. And learning languages is really important from a young age for a lot of people, because that's like when your brain is most susceptible to be able to retain the knowledge and like really become fluent in different languages. So I think that that's definitely a huge difference between schools in Barcelona and the United States. And then the last thing is that all of the mandatory schooling, which I'll talk about in a little bit, what's mandatory versus what's not for different students, but they all require art, dance, and music classes, which I'm sure you maybe experienced when you were in elementary school. They did kind of like specials or like things where you would go pop around to different classrooms and try things out throughout the week. But it's definitely very ingrained into the Spanish school system, along with math and science and language arts and history. All of that is a part of their normal curriculum as well, but also they have a lot of art and music. And so in the bottom right of this slide, you see students who are working on a science project, but it's also art-based. They're learning about these. Yeah. So this slide, kind of what I was just talking about, there's a really big emphasis on art and music in schools. And so this is just a little video of the students at my school. They got interviewed by the news because they had done a musical essentially, but it was like a required musical. It was like a part of their classes of songs by Queen, the band. And so it's kind of interesting because they're dancing and they're singing, and that part is obviously really important, but they're also singing all of the songs in English as they're learning English. So they're gaining language skills as well. So yeah, the video I'm about to play for you, it's just a short little 2-minute video. It's more for the visuals and the singing more than anything, because the speaking is all in Catalan. So the likelihood that you know what they're saying is low, but I wanted just to give you a little taste of what they kind of do for their arts enrichment.
El que han fet a l'Escola Dolors Almeda de Cornellà de Llobregat. Tots els cursos de primària han preparat plegats un musical amb cançons de Queen, i no només això, tot el musical de dalt a baix és en anglès, així que a més de cantar i ballar també han practicat l'idioma. Tot això ho han fet a l'assignatura de teatre i dansa, una assignatura que és obligatòria en aquesta escola. Estem vestits així perquè vam fer un musical i vam ser protagonistes i ens va agradar molt. Això va ser únic perquè no moltes escoles tenen l'oportunitat de fer això, un musical molt especial.
Jo vaig decidir participar perquè coneixia Freddie Mercury gràcies al meu pare. Quan puges a l'escenari i veus a tanta gent mirant-te, al principi sí que tens una mica de nervis, però després, quan ja estàs actuant, ja ni te'n recordes i llavors ho fas superbé.
Vam preparar les cançons amb la nostra professora Sílvia.
So yeah, that's just, I wanted to give y'all a little taste of kind of what the students are doing with that. I don't know how y'all would feel about that, but like I think that a lot of students in the United States would not necessarily want to have to do that at school. And so it's kind of interesting that Spanish students are doing it from so young, and it's an expectation in school, that I think it makes them a little bit more comfortable with being willing to perform and dance and sing and wear funny outfits and sing in a different language, which is really hard skill. So, and then the last thing that I'm going to talk about is the school progression in Spain and how it's different from the United States. So this chart that you see on the right kind of shows how the different how people progress through school. So preschool, which is where you see first and second cycle, and it's technically, it says like age 0 to 6, but really it's like 0 to 3 is like completely separate schooling. They generally don't have space in primary schools for preschoolers. But then starting at age 3, most of the buildings are combined. So like in the building that I worked in, we had 3-year-olds and then primary school up through the age of 12. But they're obviously learning different things, but they're all within the same space. And so primary education, which is the same as elementary school, lasts in 3 cycles: first cycle, second cycle, and third cycle. And you're essentially going from 1st to 6th grade. They don't really have a kindergarten. And 6th grade is where elementary school is over for them. And so then after that, they have another section of required school. And so that is essentially like what their middle school is, because it's considered part of secondary education. And they go through like 4 degrees of that. And so by the time they're done with like their first part of secondary education, or middle school, they're already 16 years old. But when they're 16, that is technically all of the school that like the country is going to require them to do. And they can choose from there what their next path is going to be. So they can go to qualification programs or vocational training, or they can decide to continue on to get like essentially what a high school degree is, and it's called bachillerato. And in that like stage of schooling, you're like 17 and 18 years old, and you're there for 2 years, and you're picking between art, science and technology, and humanities and social sciences. Those are your 3 options. And once you pick one of those 3 paths to pursue, you are not allowed to change it. So like for me, I'm in college right now, and some of you will eventually be in college, and I've changed my major 3 times since I've been here, and it is not as easy, or really, I really can't do it at all once you're in Spain, which the 3 paths are more general. So like generally, like you probably know if you want to do art or science more, but it does kind of limit your options, I think, going past high school for them. And so then from high school, you can either go to another set of vocational training, or you can decide to take a test, which is essentially like the SAT, like standardized testing, and then you can go to university, which is just the equivalent of college. So I think that there are definitely some differences between the school progression, and between Barcelona and the United States, but generally people are ending up in the same place and having the same amount of knowledge for the jobs that they're going into. But the fact that they're done technically by the time they're 16 is definitely a difference. So